Hello, Professor. I am Shruti, and my group members are Komalpreet, Sharanpreet, and Muskan. Today, we are going to represent our Pedagogical Documentation Film Festival.
Now, I am going to present what is pedagogical documentation. This refers to making, thinking, and learning visible of children, activities, and experiences into different ways, like transcripts of children's words, ideas, photos, videos, text, and so on. Pedagogical documentation is a mean to learning about how children think and learn. It is also explained as representation of children's work to analyze their learning.
Why is it useful to do pedagogical documentations every day in the classroom? It is important for educators to look carefully at what they do every day. It helps them to understand that how their actions have an impact on children and their families. It helps to plan and create a curriculum which follows a child's lead. Pedagogical documentation is used as a means to value, discuss, and makes learning visible. This helps to know about the level of a child's development and what further steps can be taken in order to promote learning. Pedagogical documentation helps to find meaning in what children do and what they experience. It is a way to value children's experience and include their perspectives. It is a way to make children's learning and understanding of the world around them visible to the children themselves. It is a process for educators to co-plan with children and with their families.
What makes documentation pedagogical? When the documentation is more than the display of any topic, it is considered as a pedagogical. It is a tool for the creation of democratic and reflective pedagogical practices. When the documentation influences the curriculum path, then it is pedagogical as without interpretation and analysis. It cannot be pedagogical. Pedagogy is defined as the understanding of how learning happens and the philosophy and the practices that support the understanding of learning. Pedagogy provides a new way of thinking to educators to consider their work efficiently. When the documentation gives children a voice and it reveals their thinking, the theory they are building make a documentation pedagogical.
How can we create a pedagogical documentation into a high quality documentation? For that, we should make the learning visible to others by providing evidence of children's learning through images, videos, transcripts, artifacts, etc. Documentation not only allows us to make visible the learning of group and individual learning, but can promote learning within the group. When children learning is documented, they can revisit and interpret their learning experiences and how to develop these experiences further. Making learning visible through documentation provides educators information about children's learning and progress that may not be evident in formal assessments, checklists, and standardized tests. It should contribute to the depth of children's learning from their activities and experiences so that children can stimulate the memories. It should also allow parents to understand the experiences in which their child is engaged. Sharing documented work at school with parents is a great way to participate in their child's learning. Documentation also allows for the parents to understand the work and the learning that their child is engaged in and think about ways that can contribute to work in a thoughtful way. It should also help teachers in planning decisions after evaluations of children's learning.
On our field placement, we all got a chance to did our first documentation. We had to observe children and then we organized different activities according to their interest. We were working with different age groups. We had to document the learning experience of children. The documentation was not a high quality because that was our initial learning. There were no images, audios, and transcripts used by us. And our mentors gave us an opportunity to write down about the things, skills which we observed. We didn't include more about the things what they did, but we focused on the scaffold learning as we tried to enhance their previous knowledge. We wrote down the skills which they developed and the material which were provided to them by us. We also added the four foundations which are well-being, belonging, expression and engagement through which children are connected in these experiences. We also wrote down the words said by the children while communicating with each other. For example, their viewpoints, turn taking and so on. This was our initial documentation which was not so reflective and it requires more information.
The second documentation example includes an image which tells us a next step to document our learning in a better way. This documentation includes pictures of a child while doing activity which shows his engagement, emotions, and feelings. With the help of this documentation, we can find that either the child is interested or not in the experience, as the image clearly tells us that the child is happy while doing the activity. He was also engaged with the cups and he was reading the material. Thus, this documentation improves a visual representation and it shows a good evidence that about what learning is happening. But still, there is some need to improve. For example, we can add more audio scripts into this documentation so that we can know what child is learning carefully. The third documentation example represents an audio and visual learning of the children. This represents a good level of documentation as we are able to see that how much the child is engaged in this learning. Also, we are able to listen the thoughts of the child. If this documentation is viewed by the parents and the educator, they will get to know what things the child is learning over here. There are some audio clips which clearly shows that the child knows different things and the educator can use those things to scaffold his learning. Educators can plan a better curriculum for the child by considering his previous knowledges. This documentation clearly reveals the words which were said by the child and the images that how the child is engaged. So for me and for my group members, this is a high quality documentation. According to us, this was an high quality documentation example because this video completely includes that how the educator initiated the experience. This video also tells us that when the educator and the child went to the field and they experienced different things, the child learning was very visible, and when they came back, the educator used that learning to teach new concepts to the child. She taught the mathematizing concept with the help of the scaffold learning.
After having a group discussion on pedagogical documentation, we have concluded that the documentation focuses on the memories, thoughts, ideas, and the learning experiences of the children. It also focuses on displayed images that it should capture the expression and the engagement of children's learning. Documentation should reveal the planned process and the completed learning of children.
Here are some of our references from which we have taken our material. Thank you so much for giving some time to our presentation.